morning. Thank you for tuning in to this month's genealogy program. Today is November 9th, 2024. I'm Jessica Ashton here on behalf of the Royal Gorge Regional Museum and History Center. I'm coming at you from City Hall as always. And today's topic is Seaman's Protection Certificates. And I am interested to learn more about this. I know nothing about this topic. I do have a few announcements, but I'll save those for the end. And as always, as we're going along, Terri will give her presentation. If you have any questions, comments, any feedback, anything you want to kind of touch on, go ahead and drop it into the chat box in the Zoom feature there, and we'll be happy to address those at the end of the program. Thank you, and I will hand it over to Terri.
Good morning. And just like Jessica said, I knew absolutely nothing about Seaman's protection certificates. I never even heard of them until doing some of my husband's genealogy. We've had 3 days of snow here, so grab a cup of coffee, sit back under a nice fuzzy Afghan, and relax for the next hour. We've all heard the expression Britannia ruled the waves. Well, England did have the largest and strongest navy at the end of the 18th century and into the early 19th century. But what we have to realize is that England was at war for the most part of this time. That huge navy protected their island nation. It protected their economic ventures. And this was a time of exploration. So they too were competing to expand their global empire. Their navy tripled in size during the French and Napoleonic Wars. And what we have to realize is England was at war. The colonies had declared their independence in 1776. The revolution occurred until 1783. In 1796, Spain signed a treaty with France against England. And Spain had been vying with England and had participated in wars on and off since 1689. So their navy was split into many fronts. They also, in 1803, they started the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted until 1815. All while British troops were still occupying what is now the United States. Even after independence, British soldiers and citizens lived in the United States. So having this large navy required seamen. You had to have a crew for your ship to leave port. And because not everyone was willing to be a seaman, they instituted a program of impressment. This program was a long-standing military tradition dating back to Queen Elizabeth I in 1563. And essentially, impressment was forcing seamen to serve in the Royal Navy. Interestingly enough, even though there were many court challenges throughout the centuries, this program of impressment was still legal even in the early 20th century. So, how do you find seamen to work on ships? How do you find them to get into your Royal Navy? Well, the easiest thing was to choose seamen from merchant ships. They had undergone several years of training, so that was no longer necessary when switching over to a military. And it was much easier for the Navy to choose already trained seamen than farmers, shopkeepers, or landsmen to impress. It's important to note also that desertion of the Navy was really high. We've said that they were fighting in wars. So, when do you get a break? When do you get leave? When can you leave the service if you so desire? Well, you don't get to. They had distant voyages in the 1700s. They were sailing to the northern North America continent and Central America as well. And there were poor living conditions on the ships. So we understand why the desertion rate was high. Impressment usually ended when the war ended. They no longer needed those sailors, so they let them go. When the next war kicked up, they sent out gangs to impress them back again. The British government did implement temporary embargoes. What they wanted to do was prohibit the departure of commercial ships from leaving their ports. And that way they could raid those ships for men. They actually employed press gangs to impress the soldiers, the sailors. The press gangs might be organized in order to find an entire crew for one particular ship. They also might be organized to raid one particular ship to get crewmen for the voyage that they immediately needed. They also used shore-based press gangs, and they might provide men for multiple ships. They would search taverns, the streets, the businesses. It was important for apprentices at this time in England to make sure to hold on to their apprenticeship contracts to prove that they were gainfully employed and should not be impressed. By contrast, the American Navy, even as early as the late 1700s, they recruited for a set enlistment period, whether it be 2 years or 5 years. It was for a set period of time. They did offer advance pay, as well as other benefits of better living conditions, a little bit better food. And because of this, they did draw deserters from the British Navy. And in fact, about 5 to 10% of the US Navy had previously served in the British Navy. And this was one of the excuses that the British officers used to stop American ships with the idea that they were going to reclaim their British citizens or their deserters. So we see that American merchant seamen are being forced into the British Navy. And one of the reasons is that they didn't have any kind of paperwork to show what their nationality was. They were victims of the press gangs. They had no proof that they were, quote unquote, American citizens. This practice continued, especially up until the War of 1812. This was one of the stated causes of the war. Britain was fighting Napoleonic Wars. They needed more sailors. So what better target than the U.S. Seamen? And in fact, over 6,000 American citizens were impressed into the Navy, British Navy, and over 2,500 of them refused to work and actually spent time in prison because of it. On November 6th of 1793, Britain passed a law or an order that allowed captains to stop, search, and seize any American ship. I don't know how they did it, but this order was kept a secret for 3 months. And we get an idea of how heavy the sea traffic was. In that 3 months, the British Navy captured 300 vessels. Now, I don't know that those were all American. They might have been French or Spanish vessels as well. But that's a huge number in 3 months. So, and Britain's perspective was that they were saving the Western world from Napoleon. They were fighting. Napoleon had seized power and was spreading his empire, and they wanted to protect their native property as well as their colonial empire. So in response to that, the federal government came up with the idea of protection papers. In May of 1796, they enacted a program to protect them, American seamen, from impressment. The U.S. collectors of customs were authorized to issue what are called Seamen's Protection Certificates. The seaman paid a fee of 25 cents, and initially he had to prove his citizenship. Well, there wasn't any way to prove your citizenship. There was no paperwork to prove your citizenship. So the laws were relaxed a little bit. And what went on those certificates? It documented the name, the age of the person, and their place of birth. And it gave a detailed physical description of the sailor. Should the ship founder, then we wanted to be able to identify any of the bodies. And it showed that they were citizens of the United States. They were actually printed documents. They varied in size and style depending on the state where they were issued from. Many of them did have the words United States of America printed at the top, or the word protection might have appeared on them. And we'll see some examples. You have to realize that the Seaman's Protection Certificates went to the seaman. So we have a rare exception to find the actual certificate because it went with the seaman. Some of them have American eagles across the top to decorate them. All of them do include a serial number. And sometimes that serial number is also recorded on their application or their affidavit of citizenship. The wording is pretty much standardized on the forms, especially for the applications and the affidavits. And while the printing may be a little different, the basic tenets are the same. And we will look at quite a number of these certificates or applications and affidavits to show this. They were issued to American seamen from the end of the 18th century, from 1790s up until the first half of the 20th century. There was a time between the Civil War and World War I, where their certificates were not heavily used. But once World War I came about, they were issued once again. As of 1940, they were replaced by merchant marine licenses and other forms of sea documentation. So how did seamen prove their citizenship? They are transient. They come from various different areas. They are sailing all over the world. So what kind of proof did they have? Initially, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there were no written documents to prove that you were an American citizen. So they relaxed the requirement to have a notarized affidavit, and they had to have a witness who could swear to the person's citizenship. These papers initially were not always honored by the Royal Navy. Customs agents at the various ports were required to issue these certificates, and they maintained registers of the applications. And they kept the accompanying proofs of citizenship. So that's why we have the applications and affidavits. They would forward quarterly reports of the registered seamen to the Secretary of State. That's the U.S. Secretary of State. They were finally discontinued in September of 1940 because by that time, passports were quite prevalent and other seamen's documentation was also instituted. They were replaced in some cases by a continuous discharge certificate. And these were certificates that the person carried on board the ship. And it was their official and legal record of their sea experience. The master of the ship would sign off on the document, and they could keep these certificates for approximately 5 years. So each voyage that they made, they would take this certificate with them and record the legal record of their sea experience. An interesting sideline with respect to seamen's protection certificates is the idea of tattoos. They were not invented by seamen, but this is one of the earliest sources of documentation for early American tattoos. They used the document to further describe the physical description of the seamen. If they had initials, many of the seamen had cross tattoos to indicate that they were Christians, and should the ship go down, that it would kind of ensure that they would get a Christian burial. So we have an increase in tattoos, and there were artists aboard the ships that actually worked to provide the tattoos. They used initials, dates, various symbols of their life aboard, and something called Liberty poles. And here are a couple of examples, very simple tattoos that might have occurred on those Seaman's protection certificates. What is a Liberty pole? It was something that was used very commonly in the New England states, definitely not in the southern states. And it was a tall tree trunk that was erected in a public place, a public square, and it had placards and banners. And it was a protest against British rule. And they did disappear after the Declaration of Independence. And while that's not exactly what I would have interpreted, but supposedly this is a painting of a Liberty pole. It's also important to note that Black sailors use these Seaman's protection certificates to certify their non-slave status. And I was particularly interested to read that Frederick Douglass, in order to escape slavery, he used a protection paper from a free Black sailor. And this is a quote from Douglass explaining how the process worked. He was not the only one that did this. A slave nearly or sufficiently answering the description set forth in the papers would borrow or hire them till he could, by their means, escape to a free state, and then by mail or otherwise return them to the owner. The operation was a hazardous one for the lender as well as for the borrower. A failure on the part of the fugitive to send back the papers would imperil his benefactor, and the discovery of the papers in possession of the wrong man would imperil both the fugitive and his friend. It was therefore an act of supreme trust on the part of a freeman of color, thus to put in jeopardy his own liberty that another might be free. Powerful words. So where do we find some of these documents, and what kinds of documents are available, since the certificates themselves, in most cases, have not survived? Family Search has a number of indexes, and they also have proofs of citizenship, as well as the register maintained by the clerk, the seaport clerk. We notice that here is an index, and I point out the name of Ruth Priest Dixon. She did an awful lot of research on the Seaman's protection certificates. This particular set is a 2-volume set. She has an additional volume, but she is the one that scoured the records at the National Archives and put all the information, extracted the information from these sources. So she made an important contribution. Trying to get my mouse to work. There. Here is another volume by Ruth Dixon. Here again, an index. Note the ports and the years that are included. And Family Search also does have the proofs of citizenship, the affidavits for numerous years. This is particularly from New Orleans. And we see that it is 12 rolls of microfilm. We have the register also, which is a single volume book. And from Ancestry, we see the same thing. We see the citizenship affidavits, the register of the certificates, indexes to the certificates. Those are the Dixon copies. And we also come across 1930 Merchant Seaman Schedule. And we'll talk about that because that is a unique document. It's also important to point out, at least on Ancestry, as well as on other platforms, the spelling. I did my initial search for Seaman, Seamen, but Ancestry also has the applications. But to find them, you have to spell Seaman, Seaman. So whenever doing searches, do all forms of spelling. So let's take a look at the affidavits to get started. This is one from the year 1793. On the 12th day July, in the year of our Lord, 1793, before me, Clement Biddle, notary public for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we will note a number of different certifying agencies that the men could go to pay their 25-cent fee. Duly commissioned and qualified and authorized by law of the said Commonwealth to administer oaths and affirmations personally came John Anderson, seaman of the ship Loom of Philadelphia, whereof Captain Wilson is commander, now bound on a voyage from the port of Philadelphia for St. Mark and back to Philadelphia. And being duly from, according to the law, on his solemn oath, did depose and say that he is a native of the state of Delaware, and that when the independence of the United States of America was declared by the Court of Great Britain, he resided in or was in the service of the United States, and that be truth, since continued to be, and now is a citizen or subject of these United States, that he is 23 years of age, 5 feet 9 inches high, brown hair, freckled, a mark on his left arm, and it's sworn before the notary and signed by the notary. So we get his declaration that he is born in Delaware and is indeed a citizen. This particular certificate is from the 19th of August, 1800. We see the official, Alexander Todd, and he is an alderman of the city. And this is also from Philadelphia. And we have Daniel James Reed. He's 5 feet 7 inches tall, fair complexion, light hair, 25 years of age. And he has a small mole and 2 cuts on his forefinger of his left hand. He was born in Pennsylvania, and we see that his father, Samuel Reed, is attesting to his citizenship. So there is potentially genealogical information on here as well. This one from the 23rd of July, 1792. The official is John Mitchell, and he is a judge, some kind of judge or justice of the quorum of the city of Charleston, South Carolina. John Mahoney is appearing before him. And on this one, we don't get a physical description. And he is an immigrant, quote unquote. He states that he has resided in the United States for 12 years and has taken the oath of allegiance to the state of South Carolina. And his sea captain, Captain Hunter, is attesting to his citizenship. We have another statement from Mr. Biddle, our notary public of Philadelphia. This one in October of 1801. Benjamin Taylor is appearing before. He too is a native of Delaware, 5 feet tall, dark brown hair. He has the mark of a heart on his right arm below his elbow with India ink. We've got a tattoo. And William Taylor is attesting to his citizenship. You'll also note at the bottom of this certificate, there is a number, 7936. That is the actual number of the certificate, the Seaman's Protection Certificate that was issued to him. I apologize for the mouse. November of 1806, Benjamin Nuns, N-O-N-E-S, is our notary public. And Charles Davis, he was born in Princess Anne County of Virginia. He's 23 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, with dark hair, hazel eyes, a broad nose, and a round chin. He has a pockmarked face and a dark complexion. 2 round scars, and with India ink on his right arm, a crucifix, a double heart with the printed letter PM, a mermaid, and the letter CD. Multiple tattoos. That right arm must have been pretty crowded. Samuel Davis is attesting to his citizenship. And here again, we see that he makes his mark, and Samuel Davis also makes his mark. We don't have any indication as to the relationship between Charles and Samuel, but perhaps they are related, either brothers or father and son. We also note on that lower right hand, not as far as the corner above the signatures, 16790, the actual certificate number. Uh, 1810. Whoops, I skipped one. Here's one from September of 1801. And we notice the little symbol at the upper left-hand corner. This is probably the alderman's symbol for the particular area, Philadelphia. But we have Alexander Todd again, our alderman, and William Brown is appearing. And it gives his description. He's 5 feet 3.5 inches tall with a very dark yellow complexion and black hair. He is identified as a Negro, free born. So he was born in New York City. He's 19 years old, and he does have some cuts. And Helen Tippett is his witness. Here again, we don't know any possible relationship, but perhaps she is his mother or a sister. And we have a 7834 with the 25 Feb as the certificate of issuance. Notice the eagle, United States, territory of Orleans. So we have our official, John Lind. And it's important when doing this genealogical research, we're looking at relatives of the actual seaman, perhaps. But was one of your relatives the witness, the alderman, or the one who is certifying the affidavit? These are important roles too. Did your ancestor serve as an alderman and write some of these? Was he a notary public and performed this function in his port? So we have another one, Lyman Littlefield. He's a native of Newport, Rhode Island, and we have a description of him. He is has a black complexion, and he too is a free black man. John Dennis is his witness. So we see varying types of information. We've seen just the plain one. We've seen an immigrant. We've seen tattoos. We've seen free black men. And yet a different kind of form. And we see that, we've got a free mulatto in this case. This one is from July of 1806. William Shoemaker is the alderman. John Peters is our applicant. He's 18 years old. He was born in Philadelphia. And Richard Caldwell is his witness. January 9th, 1806, John Douglas, our alderman of Philadelphia again. And we have John Taylor, an Indian, born in New Jersey. And Henry Croft is his witness. And again, at the bottom, we see 13598, his certificate number. So what does the register? The register was the thing that was filled out by the official entering this. This one happens to be from Providence, Rhode Island. And I believe it might be the only, no, there's others as well. So we'll take a look at some of the records here. This is some of Ms. Dixon's work. She has extracted the information from the National Archives rolls of microfilm or the actual papers. It's an alphabetized listing for this particular port. The date that the certificate was actually issued, the age of the seaman, a description of his complexion, where he was born, and the book, et cetera, that the information can be, the original information can be found in. Many of these are going to look exactly like the certificates that I have just shown you. And we see further information. The index to the certificate applications and the proofs of citizenship. Here again, it's a extracted information, but it shows the different ports that are going to be covered and the years that the certificates are available for. We have the listing of the ports and how many names appear at each one of those ports, as well as the pages where the information can be found. And it gives a description as to what's on the applications, what is contained within the proofs of citizenship, and the quarterly abstracts that were issued by the customs collector, and where more information might be available. The quarterly abstracts, she notes, are missing are the witnesses and anecdotes about the seaman and his family. I have not found any anecdotes in any of the reading that I have done of these certificates. This is a listing of what the National Archives actually has. And we see numerous states. And it's surprising to me that some of the states I considered to be kind of inland. I didn't think, well, New Hampshire, I guess Portsmouth is that one little tip. But we have southern states as well. We've got Alabama, and we have Charleston, South Carolina, and we've got Louisiana, so that southern tier. Here are the actual record groups at the National Archives. The actual applications and oaths are in record group 36, as well as some crew lists and shipping articles and logbooks. And we see record groups 41 and 59. The 59 especially about impressed seamen. So in the same vein, this is from one of the registers from Newport, and it's simply the person's name, the year that the certificate was issued in, how old they were, and the state that they came from. And in the case of Mr. Cassidy, we see that he is a naturalized citizen as of 1815. These are going to look very, very, some of them are going to look very similar, but others of them, this is from 1916 to 1940. So these applications look completely different than what we have seen up until this point. I will make one comment that I included a record in this group that doesn't belong in here, but we'll look at the 1916s to 1940. This is the young man that actually got me set on this path. This is a relative, a distant relative of my husband, Martin Beeman. And he was 16 years old and applied for a Seaman's protection certificate. And I'm going, what in the world is that? So, but we see sketchy details. We see where he was born. It's his first ship voyage and what ship he is going to be going on. And it includes the statement of his citizenship and the type of proof that he has. And it includes a picture. We've got the description, but we also have a picture and a thumbprint. This is the one that is erroneously inserted from 1805 and very, very similar to the ones that we've seen in the past. This is for a William Badger residing in New Orleans upwards of 2 years and was here previous to the 30th of August, 1803, and fought in the Revolution. He's 49 years old, so quite old at this point. We have William St. John Mayo, who is coming, and this is one where the above applicant will be given employment. So it's one of those catch-22s. He has to show that he's employed to go on a ship, and by the same token, in order to get employment on the ship, he has to have a Seaman's protection certificate. So an interesting quandary for this young man. And it's from 1924. So after World War I, we have Hugh Haney with the same type of information that we have seen. His birthplace, the description, his photograph. But in his folder, we also have information from his parish church about his baptism. He was born in 1899, prior to the issuing probably of birth certificates, who his parents were and who their sponsors were. And we see the stamp of the church and the cover of the church. And we also have a memorandum showing that he will be employed on our vessels, the Oceanic Service Corporation. And that 66300 is probably his certificate number. Here we have Mr. Max Hessam and his description, photograph, numerous seals, and we see his number at the top. And this form is issued by the Treasury Department. And apparently this is an affidavit of the loss of his Seaman's certificate. So he is asking for a replacement. His passport was returned mutilated. Now, whether they did the actual in August of 1929, so that's 2 years after this certificate has been issued. So don't know whether his passport was mutilated in some kind of accident or whether the office actually destroyed it, since he had the Seaman's protection papers. Walter Astrop And this one comes from Hawaii. So they're all over. This is a listing of lost certificates, where the certificates were issued from. And a great number of them were issued in England. So I don't know whether this is something that was issued by the British government, but this is a U.S. set of documentation. So, but the numbers don't correspond to those that are issued normally in the United States at this particular time. But it talks about the loss, where it was lost, and if known, when it was lost. This one is for Gordon Thomas Wells of Alabama. He's an oiler and a water tender, and he was previously on the SS Dinsmore, and he will be next on the, I believe it's Antmos, and this certificate is from 1929. So we see some very current ones. There are also applications for vessels and their owners or their captains to sail in particular waters. This certificate is from 1918. So we're in the midst of World War I at this point. And we have the certificate for Mr. Ayers, but we also have that the Slocum is authorized to travel about in the water harbors and waters of this particular area. And he has a special license issued by the Customs Service for the port of Eureka, California. And it is for both the ship, the Slocum, as well as for his owner and captain, Charles Ayers. We will take a look at some of these just briefly. I showed or talked about initially how the United States of America, eagles appeared. We have seals that appear on these. So we'll just scan some of these. This is from the 11th of May of 1796 for an Andrew Bottler of Maryland. We see the decoration along the side. We have the district and port of Newport, and one of the very early certificates, a number 401 for John Borden in 1797. We have the Eagle and United States of America. We have our number 2085 for Joseph Foster. I think it's James Reed. And in that upper right-hand corner, we have 1748 for our certificate number. Moving later, we have a duplicate issued in 1834 from the certificate that was number 21855, which was originally issued in September of 1826. This one is for James Jansen as late as 1851. And his number is 41,884. And one that actually says protection on it. The quarterly abstracts, these happen to be from the Port of New York in the year 1844. And we see that just skeletal information of name, age, height, birthplace, and their home port, and any room for any notes. The Mystic Seaport Museum also has records for their particular port extracted in a very similar fashion. And the National Archives, of course, has the originals. There is a National Archives in Boston that covers the New England states. The branch in Philadelphia also has their particular records, and all the others for New Orleans, et cetera, are in Washington. In 1930, we have merchant seaman schedule. This is the first, and to the best of my knowledge, the only time that these were enumerated. All persons aboard the ship except the officers who had a regular and fixed place of abode were not included. Those were at their home addresses where they were enumerated. Married seamen were enumerated on the vessels on which they were employed as of the 1st of April of 1930. And we'll see basically the information is very, very similar to a regular census enumeration, but at the top we will get the name of the vessel and the home port or the port that they were actually anchored in on that census day. Here we have one for the Dollar Steamship Company. The ship is the President Grant out of Seattle, Washington. And it has the usual information. What is interesting is on the extreme right column, it is the address of the next of kin. I also call out at the bottom of this that the occupation on one of these is the band leader and some of the band men. So this must have been a pleasure ship. The Grand Trunk Milwaukee Car Ferry Company. And we see on this, on lines 35 and 36, we see women for the first time, and they are maids on the ship. The Southern Pacific Steamship Lines on the SS El Mundo. And this one notes Negroes working on the ship in 1930. And we have the American France line, the SS Sarkozy out of Philadelphia. All men from all different places. And finally, the Inland Waterway Corporation, the Mississippi Warrior Service, the steamers on the Mississippi River. So with that, we conclude today's presentation on Seaman's Protection Certificates. Hopefully, we have all learned something today. It's a highly narrow focused topic, but one of potential interest for you and your family. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Terry. That was just great. I'm just going to jump right into announcements here. And so we don't have another genealogy program this year. This is a wrap for 2024. So we'll see you back January 11th when we discuss postal service. Coming up this month at the museum, November 20th, and we've got our community coffee and conversation. Everyone's invited to come down 612 Royal Gorge Boulevard, 9 a.m. It's a free program, or not a program, but a discussion. And the topic this month will be Italian heritage. So it should be a fun topic. There's been a lot of Italian immigrants to this area, and so hopefully we get a good turnout on that discussion. Then November 21st is our spot on KRLN's morning line every third Thursday of the month. We're on KRLN. So tune into that. And then November 22nd, we're partnering up with the Canyon City Public Library and Estes Rockets, and we're doing a rocket build for kids. I don't remember the age range exactly. I think it's 8 to 13, I want to say, but we can double check. But if you have kids or no kids kind of in that older range, it'll be a really fun event. So check either the Canyon City Public Libraries information or the museum. We have more information on that for registration. And that's all I've got. Thank you for being here. We don't have any questions, so we'll wrap it up.